I'm welcome to Thete Game, and in this video I'd like to discuss the new cohort of Stormcast Eternals coming our way, of which I have a number of issues. See, the thing about Stormcast Eternals is they have this huge range of not particularly diverse models. They all look very similar, slightly different weapons and abilities, very slightly, and the number of units is huge. Massive. This presents a number of problems to players, I think. The first is a problem that they share with, say, Space Marines in 40k. I, last week, had a game of 40k with my Necrons against Space Marines. Unfortunately, the units brought by the Space Marine player were just bog standard stuff. You know, the stuff you get in the box sets, you ram it together. Space Marines have access to some extremely nasty units. You know, as you'll be seeing again this Saturday in this week's 40k battle report. You know, Relic Contemptor Dreadnoughts with Volkite nastiness, Eradicators, Eliminators, Blade Guard Veterans, Veterans with Jump Packs and Lightning Claws. They have some very nasty tools at their disposal. But in amongst these harbingers of death, there are pages and pages and pages and more pages in supplements of chaff. Of units that have a bit of staying power, sure, but toothless. And this is what happened in that game last week. You know, my Necrons are not a strong force at all. I like them, but they're not strong, and they easily won. The casual player is unlikely to navigate their way through the vast range of units to feel something decent, particularly when the most efficient way to get an army of a certain points value is actually to get some of the weaker units. You know, and some may not care, of course, which is fine. It's why I play Necrons sometimes. But you know, although I don't mind winning or losing, you sort of feel that you want to have a game. You know, some will just be overwhelmed by the choice and disappointed when they're forced after being bought, assembled and painted. I mean, let's think that through. For some people, it's a significant cost, even if you're building it efficiently. In fact, especially if you're building it efficiently, there's probably a reason you're building it efficiently. You've got to spend all that time assembling it and all that time painting it. All right, that's not always done in a casual local gaming club. And then it just fails in every game because, do you know what? Even if your tactics are fine, there's no way of picking this turd up by the clean end. You know, and Stormcast Eternals has this problem. It's clear that Games Workshop are really pushing them, like really pushing them. They already had a massive range and it's now been massive. I don't just mean it's been expanded upon. It's been massively expanded upon. But whereas Space Marines are popular, so actually there's justification. I get Games Workshop bringing out more, you know, and a larger and larger range of models for them. Stormcast Eternals, not really. Other than the way that Games Workshop will push them on new players. They're not actually popular. Despite always being in the Age of Sigmar box set, despite being in the recent Mortal Realms series, that's the only way they boost up the figures of these models. You know, despite being pushed very hard by the company, people just aren't that bothered by them. You know, looking at the new battle tome, you get the impression that Games Workshop aren't even taking the hint. You know, there are some incredibly powerful units in there, even for their points. They've decided, right, we're going to appeal to the power gamers now. It's like they're deliberately trying to create a power gamers paradise. You know, if they could just start winning tournaments, then people will love them and get more of them. And the recent article on the Warhammer community site showed some results from tournaments for Age of Sigmar. Stormcast Eternals were performing very poorly indeed. Now, this was before their 3rd edition battle tome, of course. It'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 6 months of tournament results. I would expect them to go up. But the question I have is, why are Games Workshop trying to push the Sigmarines onto us? As I say, I get that Space Marines are naturally popular. They weren't pushed, they were just naturally popular. People really love them. So, of course, you have to create lots of new models. Get that? It's a shame that it results in a range that then creates a quagmire for more casual players who can easily invest a lot of time and money into what ends up being a weak army. It sounded good on paper and then completely by accident, because it's a job and a half to properly analyse such a massive range without referring to a wider community group. But it's an understandable consequence. It's just unfortunate. With Stormcast Eternals, Games Workshop have deliberately created this drawback without it being a natural consequence of popularity or accidental competitive power. Stormcast Eternals are boring. They are so boring that I cannot bring myself to read any fluff that includes them in a significant way. I have read no books that involve them because I tried and I couldn't get past the first chapter. They just suck the fun out of every scenario. And even playing them is not as dull as reading about them, but in the grand scheme of things, they're nowhere near the top in terms of the most enjoyable list to play. I should love them in theory because paladins are my thing in fantasy roleplay. I've played a paladin every fantasy role-playing game I've played since Dungeons & Dragons as a young lad. A whole army of paladins, now you're talking. But I doubt I'll ever get round to building my own. I keep saying I sort of will, and then I just think, it's just so tedious. Which is, of course, my subjective opinion. I get that. But it's also the general view of the hobbyist, because as much as Games Workshop push this army, they just don't work. And there's an argument for just leaving it. Well, you don't like them, and maybe others don't either. Just don't buy them and leave it at that. But the thing is that there are models missing from the range of other armies. If they were just adding this on and everything else was fine, then yes. There are models that only exist in fine cast or metal. Games Workshop could be designing new plastic versions of these instead of the boring Goldman variant number 267. When GW design, when they sort of work on the design of a model, they are disappointing players of armies who are still having to put up with 30-year-old metal models badly in need of an update. I mean, when a Skaven, when they have a core unit, the Scryer Acolytes, that cost £10 a model for a very basic metal monstrosity, there are definitely models in need of updates. Now, if they were working on models for a new range, like the rumoured Chaos Dwarfs next year, at last, or on a different unit that only exists in fine cast or metal, as they did with my lovely Blood Knights recently, fair enough, because you're disappointing some people, but there's other people who'll be delighted that you're updating their range. But when they're designing models that don't look a lot different to models that already exist in modern plastic, for an army that already has by far and away the largest range of any army in Sigmar, and isn't even for a popular army, then I think at that point it's a decision worthy of criticism. Because who does it benefit? It doesn't seem to benefit anyone. It doesn't even seem to benefit Games Workshop. Because when you bring out models that people don't really care about in favour of ones that would be eagerly anticipated, you are annoying customers for no gain of other customers. By way of compensation. It's not a case of, you can't please everyone. Whatever we do, whatever we focus our design on, we're going to please some people and annoy. And that, there is an argument for that when you do so many armies. Like, if you design a new range for, one particular army, there'll be some players who play that army and you please them. And everyone else of all the other armies who thinks that they should get some love is disappointed. And there's always that argument with Games Workshop's model. But business model, that is, not model. But it's not like that. Who are you pleasing with this? You're doing something that nobody really asks for. Even people who like Stormcast Eternals, okay, they're not going to say no to a wider range, but the range was fine. They just wanted them to be made a bit more competitive. Why don't you just focus on the rules instead of new models? You're doing something that nobody asked for in favour of something that lots of people want. A bit like with the second range of Lumineth Realm Lords. They were already super competitive. They already had a decent range of models, not huge, but as good as most armies. Yet they still got an expansion that basically doubled their range. Why? Nobody asked for it. It only served to make an already competitive army even scarier in tournament play. And other neglected armies continued to be neglected. But at least Lumineth seemed popular. Another one where I think they're boring, but I can accept that I'm not in the majority on that one. But why did GW even want to adopt a position of putting effort into pushing an already bloated range as opposed to designing models that meet demand? Why don't they ask the community what they want? I mean, we've been asking for Chaos Dwarfs for, 20 years now? That's what gets me. Answers on a postcard. Or better still, in the comments below. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, then please click the like button. And until next time, I'll see you later.